Well, so good morning to all, and I open with an apology for not having uploaded last week's session onto the Moodle for the very simple reason that it was completely inaudible, incomprehensible, and despite my best efforts to use the microphone over there, it turned out ill. So much so that, as I have just said, no sensible human being, however keen his ears might be, might glean any comprehensible piece of information from it. So my next best solution is to try not to move so much as I speak, and I shall try to be standing here in front of this camera, in which also is embedded the microphone, in the hope that it will record me reasonably well and that I will be able to upload it safely onto the Moodle. That being said, it was never my intention, as you know, to upload recordings to the Moodle, but I have decided to do so if possible. And sadly, last week's recording made it impossible. But I hope that today's recording will be audible and comprehensible enough. In any case, we will begin with a short revision of what we did last time. And then what I propose to do today is to continue with the discussion on Homer's Iliad, finish it, and next week we will begin our discussion on Homer's Odyssey. So I will begin by shortly revising what we did last time. We discussed the Homeric question, that is the very question of whether Homer was a real historical person and whether it was he who composed both the Iliad and the Odyssey, what the tradition was that he relied upon, and so on and so forth. Was Homer ignorant of writing? Did he at least know that writing was a possibility in the Greek world of his day? The answer to that was rather clear, that he might have known that writing was extant. However, he had probably no ability to use it in any practical way so as to record in writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. We spoke of the oral tradition of these large epic poems, saying that in the text itself, there is much evidence to show that they were composed orally and so transmitted by heart from one professional singer to the other. We named these professional singers. How did we name them? Aoidos, that's the singular, and the plural aoidoi, right? So they were the professional singers, the reciters of the original epic poems, and this reached its acme, its highest point with Homer. Now, it is convenient for us to speak of a Homer, although we do not know if such a person really existed. We said that for the ancients, Homer was unquestionably a real historical person. We said that Herodotus, the first great Greek historian, said that Homer preceded him by some 400 years. And of course, Plato refers endlessly to Homer as a real poet of the past. Everything Greek begins with Homer. Everything Greek as far as literature and education, as it were, begins with Homer. Greek schoolboys were required to memorize the Iliad and the Odyssey, if not all of them, if not in their entirety, then at least in large parts. And it was the really foundation of Greek education for many, many generations. And it still continues to be a literary work of great value and worth from which we can learn much. So that really in principal points is what we discussed last week at the beginning of our session. And we continued to discuss the work itself, the Iliad, which we will continue to do today. Now, we went over the first book. I will, of course, revise that now. And just a second. Good. There it is. Oh, we will see it momentarily. So we began with book 1, and we spoke first of all of the form in which the Iliad, whatever I say about the Iliad applies naturally to the Odyssey as well. So the form in which it is written, we said that the Iliad is a poem. It is not prose, and what is distinctive of ancient Greek poetry, ancient Roman poetry for that matter, is that it is written in verse. It is written in a certain meter, which is the number of syllables and the number of metrical feet, that is the rhythmical units that appear in the verse. And so the Iliad is written in what is called the Dactylic Hexameter. That was the name of the meter that we mentioned, Dactylic Hexameter. Now, you remember I gave you a graphic representation of the hexameter, dividing it into 6 hex, that's the Greek word for 6, dividing it into 6 feet, metrical feet, the first 5 being dactyls, that is a long syllable, followed by 2 short ones, giving us more or less the sound of tam, tatam. And the verse ends in 2 long syllables, tam, tam, which are termed spondees. Okay, a spondee, that's the final metrical unit of the hexameter line. And we saw, how shall we call it, an English imitation of this meter in the first lines of Rodney Merrill's translation of the Iliad. We read it, and sing now, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, the sign of Peleus, ruinous rage which brought the Achaeans uncounted afflictions. Okay, so that is the music, as it were, of the original. Sing now, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, the scion of Peleus. It sounds rhythmically the same. However, we did not continue with Rodney Merrill's translation. We moved to the equally excellent translation by Richmond Lattimore, done in the 1950s, and considered one of the most significant translations of the Iliad in English. Why? Because it retains the vigor and force of the original, it is accurate and readable, even though it contains, if you read it for yourselves, the excerpts that I sent you, it contains some archaic forms of English. In terms of syntax, in terms of the use of words, for example, Hector of the shining helm, helm being a synonym for helmet. So the use of the word helm was not, I presume, current even in the 1950s. So it was, it gave a certain timbre, that is color of ancient times to the translation, and that is exactly what we suppose the experience of the ancient Greeks themselves to have been when they listened to the recitation of the rhapsodes reciting the Iliad. And why is that? We spoke of the language of Homer. The language of Homer is also unique. The Iliad and the Odyssey are written in what is called the Homeric dialect. What is the Homeric dialect? Anyone who has had the great fortune of studying ancient Greek, and it is my hope that all of you will sometime choose to be that fortunate so as to study ancient Greek. So anyone who has been that fortunate knows that we study what is called the Attic dialect. The Attic dialect is the form of ancient Greek that was spoken in classical Athens, say in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. However, the Greek of Homer precedes that by some 300 or more years, and the language itself is, of course, Greek, but it is different in forms and also in syntax from the standard, what we consider the standard Attic Greek. It is in many cases simpler than Attic Greek, but we know that it was not a spoken language. The Homeric dialect was an artificial dialect created by the oidoi, the professional singers, for the sole purpose of reciting dactylic hexameter epics, so that the language itself contains elements that enable it to be sung in hexameters. And that, by the way, is one of the great claims of translators worldwide. Why, on the one hand, it is virtually impossible to translate the Iliad into, say, English hexameters or Hebrew hexameters for that matter. Now, it is in part true, you cannot replicate the Greek hexameter into English or into Hebrew or into any other modern language, so far as I know, because the principles on which the poetry is based are different. However, you can mimic and imitate the music, the rhythm. It is based on different principles, and the result in languages other than Greek is often, I wouldn't say unnatural, but slightly strange, and that is good and well. Why? Because we must always remember that when the Greeks themselves, the Athenians of the 5th century, listened to a recitation of the Iliad, they themselves knew that they were listening to a language that was artificial, that was not everyday speech. In many cases, archaic. In many cases, I suppose, even unclear at certain points. And what is more, the importance of the epic tradition was so great that anyone, any poet who continued writing epic poetry of whatever kind, be it heroic epic or didactic epic, like the works of Hesiod or the works of the poets of the Hellenistic period, some 500 years after Homer. So all these poets retained the Homeric dialect. Why? Because it was established, first of all, orally, that when you compose an epic poem, it has to be in hexameters, and it has to be in the Homeric dialect. So just imagine if the Athenians of the 5th and 4th centuries BC found Homer's Greek alien to them, alien but not incomprehensible, much like, say, the Hebrew of the Bible, just to make it more tangible or comprehensible for speakers of Hebrew. So in large measure, when we read a verse in the Bible, we understand it. We understand the language, but we also understand that this is not the way we speak today. That there are many grammatical forms in biblical Hebrew that are no longer extant or applicable in modern Hebrew. And the same, more or less, applies to the Homeric dialect in comparison with the Attic and later Greek dialects, all the more so when you compare it with modern Greek. Modern Greek is, of course, founded on the principles of ancient Greek, but it is, I could say, an entirely different language. Anyone who speaks modern Greek cannot, if they have not studied it well, read Homer with ease. So the Homeric dialect, as we said, is special in that it was never an everyday language. It was never spoken in everyday Greek conversation, neither in Attica, that is the area of Athens and its environs, nor in any other part of the Greek-speaking world. That is why when you have a translation that retains in the language of the translation, that retains some of these archaic elements, it is good. It is not to be denounced for that. Rather, in my view, it should be applauded. But of course, there are so many translations of Homer in English, and every translator justifies why they have chosen the specific way that they chose to translate Homer. And we can all enjoy the variety. Personally, I think that the number of translations is so great, in English that is, it is so great that it is preferable to study Homeric Greek and read the original and be done with it. It seems even easier than reading all these translations, because there is never one definitive translation. There will never be one definitive translation. Translations change with time. And what was good for the 1950s, in many cases, is found, as I said, archaic, alien to today's English speakers. That is why, as we said, the most recent translation of Homer into English was done, what, a year, 2 years ago, and it will be continued. Okay, so we began with the first book, and we read in Lattimore's translation. I will show you the text presently, but I will just read it for you now. It's part of the original experience. You know, there was no text for the hearers of Homer. So this is from the translation of Richmond, Lattimore. Sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles, and its devastation, which put pains thousandfold upon the Achaeans, hurled in their multitudes to the house of Hades, strong souls of heroes, but gave their bodies to the delicate feasting of dogs, of all birds, and the will of Zeus, was accomplished. Since that time, when first there stood in the vision of conflict, Atreus' son, the lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. So these 7 lines we called the proemium. That is the general introduction to the great poem that states the theme, the main subject of the Iliad, and that is the wrath of Achilles, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles. Another characteristic of oral epic poetry, we said, are the recurring epithets: brilliant, godlike Achilles, Agamemnon, lord of men, sometimes just Atreus' son, the lord of men, when it is clear to all that Atreus' son is none other than Agamemnon. And this is the proemium. So naturally, when you are asked, what is the Iliad about? The first thing you should say is not the Trojan War, rather it is about the horrific incident of Achilles' anger at Agamemnon that, as it says here, put pains 1,000-fold upon the Achaeans. We also mentioned that the Greeks are never termed or referred to as Greeks in Homer. Rather, they are called Achaeans, Argives, Danaans, Hellenes. That is more or less the ways that they are referred to in the Iliad. These, of course, are all Greek tribes, but there was not a Greek state that we can conceive of as uniting and sailing forth to do battle against Troy. So you will find no Greek in Homer, rather Achaeans, Argives, Danaans, Hellenes, and so forth. So within the proemium, we spoke of the invocation of the Muse, because the very first verse says, "Sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles." Sing, goddess, not sing I, or sing Homer, or sing bard. Yes, that is the poet. No, sing, goddess, because singing the Iliad was such an enormous superhuman undertaking that it was thought to be impossible to accomplish it without divine assistance. That is why, beginning with Homer and continuing in the epic tradition, every epic poet begins with an invocation of the Muse, that is, a request directed at the Muse to assist in the great recitation of the poem. Now, the Iliad, as we have it today, is divided into, as we said, 24 books. We would call them chapters in modern terms. So 24 books, comprising in all 15,693 lines of hexameter. This, in a continuous recitation, takes about 17 hours to recite, non-stop. Naturally, no human being had the patience to sit or stand or both for 17 hours listening to the Iliad from beginning to end. That is why 17, yes, 17 hours, slightly less than a full day. And so no one had the ability to actually stand, sit, or both listening to the entire Iliad being recited. That is why we suppose that the Iliad was never recited as a whole in one session, rather over a few evenings or days. that is maybe 3 hours at a time. So it would take 5-6 days to recite the entire poem. And sometimes you could just be satisfied with a recitation of a segment of the entire poem, because, and that is something that should be noted, the story was known to the listeners. Everybody knew that Hector would not survive. And not only that, Hector himself, as we shall see shortly, Hector himself says it in the 6th book of the work. So you could perhaps call it a spoiler in modern terms, but that was not the main objective of listening to the Iliad. The story was known. Part of the experience was first of all, the atmosphere, the heroic atmosphere that was enveloping the recitation, the otherworldliness of the story. Remember, we said that the heroic age, the Iliad speaks of the time of the Trojan War, that is supposedly the end of the 13th century BC, some 500 years prior to the time of Homer. And the heroes of that age were mythologically supposed to be demigods, that is, sons of gods and mortal women, or vice versa, of goddesses and mortal men, not to mention the gods themselves. So it was a world removed from everyday life of, say, your typical 8th century BC Greek person. And that was part of the enjoyment of listening to the Iliad. More than that, the artistic pleasure that was derived from listening to the poet, who was a master of his craft. First of all, Homer himself was considered as such, a master of his craft, and other professional reciters of poetry. So it can be compared to, say, listening to a recital of classical music these days. When you go to hear, I don't know, a Chopin concerto or a Mozart concerto or Beethoven symphony, these have been played innumerable times. So why go to the trouble of going to the concert hall and listening to the 9th Symphony of Beethoven all over again? We know the work. Why? Because the performance, the experience, the general atmosphere that fills you within the artistic experience, that is what makes it worthwhile. That is why we never tire of listening to the same work again and again and again. And the same applies to Homer and the recitation of the Iliad. And, well, with the necessary changes made, today we no longer listen to recitations of the Iliad, although in parts of the world, some such recitations are still conducted. There are settings where it is announced, now for 3 days every evening we will be reciting the complete works of Homer, and it still happens, but that is not what is routinely done. What is routinely done, and even that is questionable, the reading of the Iliad. Everybody, at least I would like to believe, reads the Iliad and rereads it time and time again. Why? The story is known, the plot is very well familiar, because we find pleasure in the way that the story is expressed in the, it is called rendition of the work, the manner in which it is written, in which it was composed, all those irregular epithets, the otherworldliness, the remoteness of the world in which this poem is set. So, book one begins with the great contention, the great conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon over the division of booty, right? And the booty referred to are young girls that were taken captive in one of the raids that the Greek had made over the surrounding towns of Troy. It should be noted that we call it the Trojan War. Homer calls it the Trojan War, but it was not a war waged directly at Troy or only at Troy. It was Troy and its vicinity. That is, all the towns and cities that were encircling Troy. So in one of these raids over a neighboring town of Troy, girls were taken captive and were distributed among the heroes. One of them, Chryseis, the daughter of Chryses, priest to Apollo, was given to Agamemnon, and her father, the priest, comes to ransom her from the Greeks. Everyone says that the plea of the priest should be attended and the girl released. However, that did not please Atreus' son Agamemnon in his heart, and he addresses the old man in shameful words, banishes him from the Greek camp with a very clear warning that if he should return, that would be his last day on earth. All the emblems of the god Apollo would not assist him then. Of course, the priest is very much afraid, and he goes away and then prays to Apollo to avenge him by shooting the arrows of plague at the Achaeans. Apollo, of course, consents, and the Achaean, the Greek host is struck by the plague. 9 days of really devastating casualties are endured by the Greeks, and on the 10th, Achilles convenes an assembly of all the heroes to decide how to appease the god Apollo, because it is evident that the plague is a result of the anger of Apollo. There stands the priest Calchas, one of the priests in the Greek host, and he says, I know the reason, Achilles, but promise me you will protect me if what I am about to say is going to incense, that is, to make angry, one of the most prominent men in our army. He does not name Agamemnon directly, but it is clear who he is referring to. And so Achilles promises to do that, just that, and Calchas says the exact reason why Apollo is angry, and there the dispute begins, because Agamemnon refuses to be dishonored. As far as he is concerned, the taking away of his prize, as it were, the taking away of his prize from him, the great commander of all the hosts of the Greeks, while the others remain in possession of their own prizes, that is a sheer sign of disrespect. And then Achilles counters that it is impossible now to take back all the booty that has already been distributed and divided again amongst the kings and heroes. But Agamemnon, he says, rest assured, once we sack the great city of Troy, yours will be the greatest share. Only now, take consideration, take heed of what is going on, and return the girl to her father. How does Agamemnon react to that? Well, I will show you the text now. He does not react well, we can say that. Yes, it is line 130, just a second, line 130. And he says, it's rather small, but never mind, you have the texts themselves, and as we said, it is an audible experience. So then in answer again spoke powerful Agamemnon. Not that way, good fighter though you be, godlike Achilles. Again, in parentheses, I will say here, note the English here. Great fighter though you be, not though you are. Modern day English, it would be sensible to say, great fighter though you are. But here, the translator uses what is rarely used in English nowadays, and that is called the subjunctive. God forbid we should use this word in English, according to many modern grammarians. But I say we should use it all the same, because it is what it is. This is the subjunctive. Here, not that way, good fighter though you be, godlike Achilles, strive to cheat. So Agamemnon takes Achilles' advice as an attempt to cheat him. For you will not deceive, you will not persuade me. What do you want? To keep your own prize and have me sit here lacking one? Are you ordering me to give this girl back? And then he says, I am willing to do so. I will do so. I will give her back because it is for the greater good of the army. I do not want my army to be lost, to be devoured, devastated by the plague. So I am willing to return the girl. However, I demand immediate compensation. And what form will that compensation take? Well, some other king's prize, some other king's girl, captive, will be transferred to me. And then he says, I myself shall take her, that is the other captive girl. Your own prize, that is your Achilles' own prize, or that of Aias, or that of Odysseus, going myself in person. And it is already here, and he whom I visit will be bitter. Why? Because the great king, the supreme commander of all the Greek hosts, cannot be refused. So he claims that he will go in person and seize some other king's position, some other king's prize, that is some other king's girl, and he whom I visit will be bitter. Still, these are things we shall deliberate again hereafter. The first important thing to deal with is the return of Chryseis to her father. How does Achilles respond? Now observe the insulting words, the penetrating insults that he uses when he addresses the supreme commander. Achilles is not really one of Agamemnon's subjects, because Achilles is a king in his own right. He comes from remote Thessaly, from Phthia, a Greek city that is not under the direct rule of Agamemnon. Agamemnon was king of Mycenae, very far away from Thessaly. However, under general agreement and consent, Agamemnon, along with his brother Menelaus, the two sons of Atreus, the cause of the great expedition to Troy, so Agamemnon was the supreme commander of the host, and therefore Achilles owes him his obedience. So he says, "O wrapped in shamelessness, with your mind forever on profit, How shall any one of the Achaeans readily obey you, either to go on a journey or to fight men strongly in battle? I, for my part, did not come here for the sake of the Trojan spearmen to fight against them, since to me they have done nothing. So Achilles said, the very reason that I'm here is to avenge your great insult, or rather your brother's great insult, the abduction, so-called abduction of Helen, his wife. And now you dare treat me and the other kings and the other lords in that way. And then he continues his complaint, saying that, here it is line 163, never when the Achaeans sack some well-founded citadel of the Trojans, do I have a prize that is equal to your prize. Always the greater part of the painful fighting is the work of my hands, but when the time comes to distribute the booty, yours is far the greater reward. And I, with some small thing, yet dear to me, go back to my ships when I am weary with fighting. In other words, we do all the fighting and get some puny remuneration, some slight reward, while you, who do not take active part in the fighting, and that is not precise, but you know, for the sake of oratory and making his case, you are clothed in shamelessness. You, however, get the lion's share. And then he continues to threaten, saying, now I am returning to Phthia, since it is much better to go home again with my curved ships. Again, notice this epithet, my curved ships. Why is it important to say or to indicate that the ships are curved? Well, first of all, because they are. Second of all, because it is a heroic epithet to the ships. Thirdly, because it is part of the epic tradition. And fourthly, because it fills the hexameter line. It supplies the necessary syllables as a stock formula. Ships are always curved, or having strong beaks, or having good benches for the rowers. These are all epithets that apply to ships, and we use them according to the number of syllables that is required to complete the hexameter line. So he tells him to go home again with my curved ships, and I am minded no longer to stay here, dishonored, and pile up your wealth and your luxury. Now, Agamemnon cannot now say to Achilles, you know, I've had second thoughts, I agree with you. He has been insulted. The great commander of the entire Greek host, what can he do but aggravate the situation and say, then answered him in turn the Lord of men Agamemnon. That is another formulaic expression before before the second interlocutor, that is participant in the dialogue, responds. The poet says that he is going to respond, and the formula is, then answered him in turn the Lord of men Agamemnon. I don't remember the Greek by heart, so I won't attempt it. He says, run away by all means, and if your heart drives you, I will not entreat you to stay here for my sake. There are others with me who will do me honor, and above all, Zeus of the councils. Now again, Zeus of the councils, that is another of the epic epithets employed solely to Zeus, Zeus of the councils. Now, it was generally thought that the king was ruling by the grace of the gods. He had divine sanction to rule. And that is why Agamemnon says, it is immaterial to me whether you stay or go, because on my side, I have first of all others who will do my bidding, and above all, Zeus of the councils. To me, you are the most hateful of all the kings whom the gods love. And I will recite here from the movie Troy, which I do not counsel you to watch as long as you are participants in this course, because it will give you a wrong impression of the story of the Iliad, although it is an excellent film. And there the actor Brian Cox, who plays Agamemnon, says, of all the warlords loved by the gods, I hate him the most, referring, of course, to Achilles. And this is a clear adaptation of, to me, you are the most hateful of all the kings whom the gods love. And of course, Achilles then, there's no going back, there's no reconciliation, even though the wisest of the counselors of the Greek, that is old Nestor. If you're cold, you can shut that off. Even the wisest of all the Greek counselors, Nestor, cannot, despite his very best attempts, cannot reconcile the two, cannot appease them. Achilles goes on to ask his mother Thetis to intercede for him with Zeus, so that Zeus will increase the strength of the Trojans and make the Greeks rue the day, and especially Agamemnon, repent himself of his disrespect to himself, Achilles. And he says, when he addresses his mother, in tears. So imagine the greatest of Greek heroes of all time, of all myths, Achilles himself cries on the beach of the Gray Sea, as it is called, or the wine dark sea, calling to his mother, and he weeps in the presence of his mother, saying, not only has it been fated that I would be destined to a short life, but now, on top of it all, I have also been dishonored. So a short life and disrespect, in addition, that is unbearable. Go to Zeus, ask him that he will increase the power of the Trojans until man-killing Hector reaches the ships of the Greeks, so that all of them, and especially that Lord of Men Agamemnon, understand how great is the need of me. And even so, I will not return. Now, Thetis, I am of course making things short here. Thetis agrees, Zeus agrees, and this is what happens. And then, starting from the third book till very much the ninth, there are scenes of horrible battle between Trojans and Greeks, and the Greeks are suffering defeat after defeat. There is a short interlude in book 6, where Hector returns to Troy and completely by chance meets his wife Andromache. Now that encounter, that meeting is important, at least in my view, for us to read, because it shows the emotional side of Homer combined with the heroic code. That is, Homer could describe not just the sway of battle and the clash of great armies of thousands of men, soldiers killing one another relentlessly. He could also describe the innermost feelings of one human being or of a married couple of a father to his baby son. And that is the greatness of the scope of Homer's genius. So from book 6, this is the Lattimore translation. When Hector meets his wife, now he did not intend to meet her. He meets her by chance next to one of the gates of Troy as he is about to return to battle. And Andromache, in line 405, Andromache stood close beside him, letting her tears fall, and clung to his hand, and called him by name and spoke to him. Now, all that, clung to his hand and called him by name and spoke to him, that is a formulaic expression that the poet used to introduce the speech of Andromache. And mind you, Andromache is not alone there. With her is a nurse who is holding her son, her and Hector's son, Astanax. He is a baby. And I will show you a picture of the family soon enough. So Andromache says to him, "Dearest, your own great strength will be your death, and you have no pity on your little son, nor on me, ill-starred, who soon must be your widow." Okay, so even though the tide of battle is now in favor of the Trojans, still Andromache, and you will see shortly that Hector as well, knows that Hector is going to die. His own strength is going to be his death. And her complaint is that he is inconsiderate of herself and of their son. She will be a widow and her son an orphan. And then what I wanted to show you here in line 414, Andromache goes on to say and to explain why she is so miserable. And she says, "It was brilliant Achilles who slew my father Eetion." Now, if you remember, I used this line to emphasize the point of the heroic epithet. How can a woman whose father had been murdered by Achilles refer to Achilles as brilliant? Well, she can, because it is not really up to her. It is up to the poet, the reciter of the poem, who needs this adjective, this epithet, to complete the hexameter line correctly. And therefore, Achilles must be brilliant here, even though he slew my father Eetion. When he stormed the strong-founded citadel of the Cilicians, Phoebe of the towering gates. Now, a very clear characteristic of epic is digressions. Long digressions. A speech that should be focused on Andromache's misery and Hector's impending death digresses and meanders, that is, goes on different paths that are not directly related to what we want to know. So Eetion was killed when Achilles stormed the strong-founded citadel of the Cilicians. Phoebe of the towering gates, he killed Eetion, but did not strip him of his armor, and so on and so forth. Then, not only that, Achilles also slew her brothers. Here it is, in 423. So her father is dead, and they who were my 7 brothers, in the great house all went upon a single day down into the house of the death god, that is Hades. How and why did they go there? For swift-footed, brilliant Achilles slaughtered all of them. Again, swift-footed, brilliant Achilles. Now, not only is Achilles brilliant, he is also swift-footed. Now, I grant you that swift-footed is an apt epithet here in the context of slaughter, when you chase your enemy, but still brilliant Achilles as the murderer of her brothers is a bit strange. Of course, strange to modern ears, not so to ears who are knowledgeable of the epic tradition. And then her mother died also. It was not customary to kill the women. Women were enslaved. Women and children were enslaved, the men were slaughtered. So he, again, brilliant Achilles, led my mother, who was queen under wooded Placos here, along with all his possessions. So Achilles released her, again, accepting ransom beyond count, but Artemis of the showering arrows struck her down in the halls of her father. Why? We do not know. Perhaps it is a poetic way of saying that she died. Why did she die? Because Artemis of the showering arrows struck her down. The point is that Andromache has no relatives. She has no relatives. Therefore, and these are the powerful words, Hector, thus you are father to me, and my honored mother, you are my brother, and you it is who are my young husband. So Hector is everything to her. How does Hector reply? Well, he says in line 440, he says that all these things are in my mind also, lady. Yet I would feel deep shame before the Trojans and the Trojan women with trailing garments. So it's not just Trojan women, but women with trailing garments. Again, an epic epithet. If like a coward I were to shrink aside from the fighting. So Hector knows, first of all, that he's going to die. He knows that he is going to leave his wife a widow and his only son an orphan, but still he is compelled to assume the role of a hero, of an epic hero, and follow the heroic code. And that is to win glory on the battlefield, lest, the gods forbid, he would be put to shame. If, like a coward, I were to shrink aside from the fighting, and the spirit will not let me, since I have learned to be valiant and to fight always among the foremost ranks of the Trojans. This was his upbringing. Again, the heroic code, the greatest honor a man can achieve is fighting bravely, heroically, virtuously in battle. Also, when he speaks well in the assembly of men, that also is a mark of honor, because the assembly brings honor to men. What do you discuss in the assembly? How to storm the enemy's camp. So it's all very martial and warlike and belligerent. All these words mean the same. Okay. So, winning for my own self great glory and for my father. And these are the most telling lines. For I know this thing well in my heart, and my mind knows it. There will come a day when sacred Ilion shall perish, and Priam, and the people of Priam, of the strong ash spear. So again, Priam, one of his regular epithet is Priam of the strong ash spear. Ash is a name of a tree, very hard wood from which spears were manufactured, fashioned. And here Hector says very plainly, I know it well in my heart and in my mind. Ilion, that is Troy, is going to fall, and Priam is going to fall, and not only that, where is it? And the people of Priam, that is the entire Trojan nation, as it were, is going to perish. And yet he goes out to fight. Why? Because it is not the end that matters. It is what we do while we are approaching the end. Otherwise, why wake up in the morning? We are all going to die, being all mortal. Why do anything? That is, by the way, one of the questions that is asked. What would you do if you lived forever? There is no urgency. Then again, why get up in the morning? There's always tomorrow. It is because we are mortal, because our existence is finite, and Hector knows it well. Because of that, there is a sense of urgency, a sense of accomplishment, the need to do, the need to express things, emotions, thoughts now, not later, because there is an end. Be it good or ill, there is an end, and we must do something with our time. And this is a quote, one of my favorite quotes from something that is not really connected with Troy or Homer or Greek literature. It's from Tolkien, when Gandalf says to Frodo, who is very depressed that he should be enduring the times that he is enduring, I wish none of this had happened. I wish the ring had not come to me. So he tells him, that is not for you to decide. All you can decide is what to do with the time that is given to you. And that is an encouraging thought. Now, Tolkien did not invent anything. It was already there in Greek thought and, of course, in the Iliad. It is the sense of accomplishment, the sense of doing something with your time that will win you glory. And one of the most important aspects of glory for the Homeric hero is that their glory should be immortal, deathless glory. And how is deathless glory expressed? In song. We shall become a song for future generations. That is what matters, that later generations will sing of us. They will speak of us in song. And then, of course, he goes on to say that all of this great loss of Troy, of Priam, my father, of my people, does not grieve me as much as your own sorrow, that you will become a widow and that you will be led into slavery. Now, this, of course, will come true, and even worse. Now, Hector's speech goes on for a little bit, but what I want to show you now is this. Just a second. Where is it? Just a second. Okay. It's not really visible because of the light here, but here you can see Hector, Andromache by his side, holding his little baby boy Astanax, and his great plumed helm, the shining helmet of Hector, is laid on the ground upon his shield. Why? Now, there are many representations of this scene because it is one of the most emotional and human scenes in the Iliad. Here is another representation of it, even less clear than the previous one, but more to the point, because you can see that Hector here with his helmet on, Andromache by his side, and the baby is not held by Andromache, he is held by the nurse. Okay? Why? Because the text says, so speaking, glorious Hector held out his arms to his baby, who shrank back to his fair girdled nurse, to his fair girdled nurse's bosom, screaming. So you can see that the nurse is well girdled, that is, gown is well fastened across the hips. So she is well, the fair girdled nurse's bosom, screaming and frightened at the aspect of his own father. So he sees his father terrified as he saw the bronze and the crest with its horse hair. So the baby sees his father with the terrifying helmet, the shining bronze, and the horse hair that is above it. And so, nodding dreadfully as he thought from the peak of the helmet, then his beloved father laughed out, and his honored mother. And at once glorious Hector lifted from his head the helmet and laid it in all its shining upon the ground. And I bring you back to this. This is the scene after Hector had laid down the helmet on the ground. Then, taking up his dear son, he tossed him about in his arms and kissed him and lifted his voice in prayer to Zeus and the other immortals. And now Hector implores the gods in prayer that they should grant his son to be greater than he in battle. But that, of course, was not to be. Astanax's fate was a very, very cruel one. Upon the capture of Troy, he was thrown from off the walls of the city to his death by the Greeks. It is ghastly described in the Aeneid, Virgil's great epic poem, in the second book of the Aeneid. We won't read that. We will read other horrendous parts from the Aeneid, but that is the fate of Astanax. And then, to conclude, Hector says, poor Andromache, why does your heart sorrow so much for me? No man is going to hurl me to Hades unless it is fated. But as for fate, I think that no man yet has escaped it once it has taken its first form. Neither brave man nor coward. Okay, so we all have our fates, and whether we be brave, whether we be cowards, it doesn't matter. We will meet our end. And Hector says, as for me, I will not go to the house of Hades as a coward. It is fated, and I will go down to the house of Hades as a hero. Go therefore back to our house and take up your own work, the loom and the distaff. So the traditional arts of women were the loom and the distaff, that is the making of clothes and fabrics. And see to it that our handmaidens ply their work also. But the men must see to the fighting. All men who are the people of Ilion, but I beyond others. So glorious Hector spoke and again took up the helmet. And this is the last time, by the way, that Hector sees his wife. They will not meet again. Hector will die before that happens. So, just a second. Let's go back to the text, and there it is. and the parting of Hector and for Andromache. Yes, here it is. So glorious Hector spoke and again took up the helmet with its crest of horsehair, while his beloved wife went homeward, turning to look back on the way, letting the live tears fall. So Hector is going away, she's going back home, every once in a while turning her face back to look at Hector and letting the live tears fall. And as she came in speed into the well-settled household of Hector, the slayer of men, she found numbers of handmaidens within, and her coming stirred all of them into lamentation. So, mark this well, so they mourned in the house over Hector while he was living still, for they thought he would never again come back from the fighting alive, escaping the Achaean hands and their violence. And of course, they were right. Nevertheless, Zeus, following his promise to Thetis, increases the strength of the Trojans, and they terrorized the Greeks, so much so that in the 9th book of the Iliad, Agamemnon repents, and decides to send an embassy to Achilles to entreat him, to offer him really measureless gifts, provided that he should return and take up the fight. The embassy consists of 3 great heroes: Odysseus, Telamonian Ajax, or Aias, and the old man Phoenix, who was once Achilles' own mentor and educator. And they try to speak candidly to Achilles' heart and persuade him. But Achilles remains adamant. And that, by the way, is the point of no return, because any sensible man would have taken Agamemnon's offer. Not Achilles. His pride does not allow him to yield and to acknowledge Agamemnon's repentance, even though Agamemnon repents wholeheartedly. It is not a facade. It is not a pretense. It is a candid, honest, frank change of mind. But Achilles refuses, and that is really the point of his downfall. And he speaks really in very, very harsh words, saying, and this is from the 9th book, "He cheated me, and he did me hurt. Let him not beguile me with words again. This is enough for him. Let him of his own will be damned, since Zeus of the councils has taken his wits away from him. I hate his gifts. I hold him light as the strip of a splinter." That means a splinter is a broken piece of wood or stone that is worth nothing. And this is Agamemnon's value. This is how I esteem him. Or rather, I do not esteem him at all. I do not value him at all. I hold him light as the strip of a splinter. Not if he gave me 10 times as much and 20 times over as he possesses now. Not if more should come to him from elsewhere. Okay, not all of this. Not if he gave me gifts as many as the sand or the dust is. Not even so would Agamemnon have his way with my spirit. And this, again, is the point of no return, because Achilles, being so stubborn and adamant and steadfast in his anger, in fact, unknowingly, brings the greatest sorrow upon himself that will manifest itself in the death of Patroclus, who, in the 16th book, receives Achilles' consent to go into battle and repel the Trojans from the fleet of the Greeks. But in doing so, he dies at the hand of three oppressors. The first, Apollo, who numbs him with a strike upon his armor, and then a common soldier, a Trojan by the name of Euphorbus. It's not important, but that is his name, Euphorbus, a common soldier, stabs him, and then the one who gives him the coup de grâce, as it were, the final blow, is Hector, who also strips him of his armor, Achilles' own armor, and kills him. Of course, had Achilles consented to receive Agamemnon's gifts in Book 9, none of the events of Book 16 would have transpired. This, in fact, is the horrendous result of unrelenting anger. This is the lesson, one of the lessons that we learn from the Iliad. Now, in this long speech of Achilles, there are the immortal lines that I will read to you now, beginning from 400. For not worth the value of my life are all the possessions they fable were won for Ilion, that strong founded citadel in the old days. So suppose we conquer Troy and sack it and plunder it. Why should I risk my life for that? Not all the treasures of Troy are worth my life. And why? Because he says, of possessions, cattle and fat sheep are things to be had for the lifting, and tripods can be won. A tripod is an instrument, with 3 feet on which were burned offerings and other things, and that was considered a worthy plunder to be had in war. So, as well as cattle and fat sheep. So cattle and fat sheep are things to be had for the lifting, and tripods can be won, and the tawny high heads of horses. So all these possessions come and go. You can plunder them, you can lose them, you can plunder them again. But a man's life cannot come back again. It cannot be lifted nor captured again by force once it has crossed the teeth's barrier. So it was imagined that when we die, our spirit departs from the body by way of the teeth, of the mouth. It crosses the barrier of man's teeth and moves on to Hades, to wherever it is that the spirit dwells. And it cannot be undone. Once you're dead, you're dead. And then these are the most famous lines of his speech. For my mother, Thetis, the goddess of the silver feet. Again, Thetis, the goddess of the silver feet. What does that epithet really mean? Perhaps she is so swift when she walks or runs that her feet look like shining silver, or that they are white as silver. We do not know. So the goddess of the silver feet tells me I carry 2 sorts of destiny toward the day of my death. Either if I stay here and fight beside the city of the Trojans, my return home is gone, but my glory shall be everlasting. That's one fate. Stay here and die, but my glory shall be everlasting. But if I return home to the beloved land of my fathers, the excellence of my glory is gone, but there will be a long life left for me, and my ending death will not come to me quickly. And this would be my counsel to others also, to sail back home again, since no longer shall you find any term set on the sheer city of Ilion. since Zeus of the wide brows has strongly held his own hand over it, and its people are made bold. So Achilles came to fight at Troy with the knowledge that he has double fate: either stay at Troy, fight, die, and win everlasting glory, or sail back home. Then again, never sail in the first place, but still, you're already there. You can sail back home, live a long, peaceful life, and die without glory. So at this point of the story, Achilles counsels the rest to sail back, return home. Why? Because judging from the way things are, Zeus has emboldened the Trojans, and he himself, that is Zeus, holds his own hand over it, over Troy. There's no way we can overcome Troy. Well, and he plans to sail home the very next day. That, of course, does not happen because the situation at the Greek camp worsens very rapidly, deteriorates very rapidly. And as we have just said, Patroclus goes back to the fighting, dies, and Achilles now understands that he can no longer sail back home, and he must avenge his dead friend, Patroclus. This happens famously in book 22. In book 19, there is the famous scene of reconciliation between Agamemnon and Achilles. Agamemnon claims that his mind was addled, that is, confused by the goddess Ate, the goddess of madness and confusion. He goes on to rely on even more ancient myth, the birth of Hercules in Greek, to emphasize that point that Ate can addle the minds not just of mortals, but even of Zeus himself. Then there is the reconciliation. Achilles returns to battle and wreaks havoc, that is, destroys completely the Trojan lines, and finally confronts Hector. That is the first height, first peak of the poem, the much anticipated duel between Hector and Achilles, in which, of course, Achilles, with the aid of Athena, it should be noted, slays Hector and reviles his dead body by piercing his ankles and tying him to his chariot, dragging him shamefully behind his chariot to the Greek camp. So that is the first peak, the first height of the poem. The second, which we are going to conclude with, and more important, which leads to the conclusion of the poem, is the reconciliation between old King Priam and Achilles in book 24. Book 23, on which, by the way, the poet Schiller said that if you have not read book 23 of the Iliad, then you have not read a good poem in your life. Now, book 23 describes the funeral of Patroclus and the funerary games that were held in his honor. Why is that great poetry? Well, you should read book 23, which is a rather long book compared to other books of the Iliad, and see for yourselves. What I want to show you now is the final speech of Priam to Achilles. In book 24, it is decided by the gods that the body of Hector should be returned to Priam for proper burial, because in his life, Hector was always reverent towards the gods. He showed them great reverence. And even though he died, respect must be accorded to him. And that respect will find expression in his return, rather the return of his dead body, his corpse, to his father for proper burial. Therefore, they instruct Achilles through his mother Thetis that he should return Hector's body, and at the same time, they inform through their messenger Iris, they inform Priam that he should go in the dead of night into the depths of the Greek camp and reclaim and ransom the body of Hector. Through the assistance of the gods, Priam manages to infiltrate the Greek camp, and then completely unexpected, he appears in Achilles' tent. I'll say here in parentheses, it was not really a tent, it was rather a hut, a wooden hut, but we like to refer to it as a tent. Why? Because we so imagine it in our minds, but it was really a hut. And then, this is the famous speech of Priam. Achilles, like the gods, remember your father, one who is of years like me. So he knows how to address Achilles by identifying his own self, Priam, with Achilles' own old father, Peleus. And on the doorsill of sorrowful old age, and they who dwell nearby encompass him and afflict him. Nor is there any to defend him against the wrath, the destruction. Yet surely he, when he hears of you, that you are still living, is gladdened with his heart. And all his days he is hopeful that he will see his beloved son come home from the Troad, that is the territory, the vicinity of Troy. But for me, my destiny was evil. I have had the noblest of sons in Troy, but I say not one of them is left to me. 50 were my sons when the sons of the Achaeans came here. 19 were born to me from the womb of a single mother, that is Hecuba, his lawfully wedded wife, who bore him 19 children, 19 sons and daughters, and other women bore the rest in my palace, that is his concubines. And of these, violent Ares broke the strength in the knees of most of them. Broke the strength in the knees, that is, they died. But one was left me, who guarded my city and people. That one you killed a few days, since as he fought in defense of his country. Hector, for whose sake I come now to the ships of the Achaeans to win him back from you, and I bring you gifts beyond number. And these now are the 4 lines that are most remembered from the Iliad. Honor then the gods, Achilles, and take pity upon me, remembering your father, yet I am still more pitiful. I have gone through what no mortal on earth, no other mortal on earth has gone through. I put my lips to the hands of the man who has killed my children. Now, the Greek here is Ethlend hoi ou potis epichthonios brodos allos, andros paidophonoio potisto macher oregesto. Now, this means that I have endured what no other man who walks upon the earth has suffered. To stretch the hands of the man, now, notice well, the man who killed my son, not my children, my son, referring, of course, to Hector, which is more poignant and to the point. So stretching the hands of the man who killed my son to my mouth to kiss. So this is the horrible scene of a father kissing the hands of his son's murderer. Now, why did Lattimore translate my children? Because paidophonoio, of the killer of my son, can also be translated as the killer of my children as a whole. I think, and there are other translators who think the same, that it is probably referring more to the specific son, Hector. So I brought to my mouth, I stretched the hands of the killer of my son to my mouth to kiss. And of course, Achilles is very much moved and surrenders the body of Hector, which is dutifully brought back to Troy for proper burial. And as I told you, the poem ends with the line, and so they buried Hector, the tamer of horses, breaker of horses. Again, ending with a formulaic epithet, the entire poem. Very well. So this concludes our discussion of the Iliad. It was very short and general, but still, I hope it has given you a clear overview of the work. Next time, we will begin the discussion of the Odyssey. It's going to be just one session, and then we will move on. So thank you all for being here, and I will see you next week. You're welcome.